The series begins in a strange room inside an unknown building where we see two workers carrying the body of a young girl and tossing it into a furnace to get rid of it. The story then shifts back in time to Minneapolis, where Luke is taking a university exam. We learn that he's a child prodigy with exceptional skills in mathematics, observation, and data analysis. Luke finishes the exam in record time, so fast that the other students can't believe he's actually done. Their shock grows even more when they find out he's only 14 years old. Meanwhile, Officer Tim is at the airport and decides to cancel his flight to New York due to a plane issue. He chooses instead to return to the city of Min to escape the stress of New York and forget about a problem he recently faced at work. On the way, he rides with a local woman who offers him a lift. That night, Luke tells his parents that he plans to enroll in an Institute of Information Technology so he can pursue what he loves and build a successful life. But his parents strongly disagree with his idea. Frustrated, Luke loses his temper and stares at the tray in front of him. Suddenly, it moves on its own and crashes to the floor. At that moment, we realize Luke has a supernatural gift. He can move objects with his mind, but he has no control over his power, which only surfaces when he's angry or afraid. Later that night, a black, intimidating car pulls up outside Luke's house. A woman named Michelle steps out and says they have 45 minutes to complete their mission. She and her team then storm the house. Luke senses movement around him, opens his eyes, and is shocked to see Michelle spraying him with a sedative, knocking him unconscious. The following day, Tim arrives in town and learns that the local police department is looking for a new night guard. He applies for the job and meets Sheriff John Ashworth. We also discover that Tim is a well-known and highly skilled police officer, but he has been battling psychological trauma ever since he ended the life of a 16-year-old boy. Although the teen had been armed with a rifle and posed a threat, Tim couldn't shake off the guilt, which eventually drove him away from both the police force and New York altogether. Tim is easily hired for the new job, and soon after, Luke wakes up to find himself in a room almost identical to his own. But when he steps outside, he realizes he's inside a strange building, monitored by cameras everywhere. He meets Kalisha and learns they're at a place called the Institute, which gathers gifted children like them, and they find out the kids are split into two types, one that can move objects from a distance. They're called Tiki, and the other that can read minds. They're called TP. Kalisha is a mind reader, and Luke is stunned, unable to understand why he's here or why they took him until they tell him he's been enlisted, not kidnapped, and his mission is to save the world from destruction and war. At that moment, three people are watching them on the cameras: Julia, the Institute's director, Trevor, the head of security, and Dr. Daniel, the scientist in charge of testing the children. Julia is very impressed by Luke's intelligence and decides she wants to meet him in person. Meanwhile, Tim settles into his new role and meets his colleague Wendy. He clearly takes a liking to her at first sight, and Wendy shows him the routes he'll patrol at night. His job is to make sure the whole town stays safe. Trevor goes to pick up Luke, and in the elevator, Luke sees the girl who had taken him, but Trevor stops him from speaking to her. They reach Julia's office, and she begins to explain Luke's role at the Institute, telling him he'll undergo a series of experiments intended to save the world, and that he must follow orders to complete the tests and return home. She promises that, in the end, they will wipe his memory and send him back to his family. That night, Tim walks the streets to check on the town and meets an old woman named Annie, who's obsessed with conspiracy theories. She believes powerful people control the world, that the government monitors them, and even implants listening devices in their teeth. And Tim thinks she's crazy and finds her hard to deal with. Michelle leaves the Institute grounds and notices a car pulling up to the opposite gate. A guard steps out to stop it and finds a small family inside. He tells the father to turn back the way he came, lying to him by saying the Institute is actually a contagious disease research lab and no one is allowed near the area. That night, Luke meets Maureen, the cleaning lady, who tells him that if he follows the rules, he'll earn tokens he can use to buy whatever he wants from the vending machine. She takes him to the testing room, where he meets Tony, who's supposed to attach a monitoring device to his ear. Luke refuses and is terrified, but Tony hits him and forces him to comply, placing the device in his right ear. From then on, Luke is monitored constantly, with no way to escape. The next day, Michelle meets her friend Kate at a cafe, and we find out Kate is a journalist trying to get information from Michelle about the Institute. Afterward, they leave together and pass by Tim, though he doesn't notice them, distracted with his own thoughts. Meanwhile, Luke walks with Kalisha and learns that there's a back section of the Institute, a place kids are taken after finishing the front-end testing, supposedly just before they're released and sent back home as promised. Kalisha demonstrates her telepathic powers by instantly learning the name of Luke's grandmother the moment he thinks about her. She then introduces him to George and Iris. George has the same telekinetic abilities Luke does, and he he shows off by moving a cup of water, spilling it, then lifting the water itself into the air and returning it neatly into the cup. Luke is amazed by George's control and desperately wishes he could manage his powers like that. Just then, Nikki arrives, clearly a bully, stealing tokens from the other kids in the Institute. We also learn that the children here range in age from 10 to 19. Luke grows increasingly afraid, unsure of what his own fate will be. That night, Michelle meets Kate again in a hotel room and decides to leak confidential information about the Institute to her. But suddenly, Kate shoots her dead, revealing she has secretly been working for Trevor all along, monitoring Michelle and waiting for the right moment to eliminate her for attempting to betray the Institute. Julia returns home and eats dinner alone, and it becomes clear she's a deeply disturbed person who takes pleasure in pain and torture, so much so that she even harms herself just to savor the feeling. Meanwhile, Luke plays chess with Nikki, and together they start plotting to escape the Institute. The next morning, Luke wakes to the sound of Julia celebrating. She tells him they're throwing a party for Iris, and when Luke joins, he's stunned to learn it's actually a farewell party because Iris is being moved to the back section of the Institute. She has only spare 13 days in the front section, passing all her tests with ease. But now she's terrified because she doesn't know what happens beyond that point. Nobody has ever come back to describe it. Though the children are told they'll eventually be returned home, Iris has doubts and breaks down crying. Nikki, who spent weeks whispering conspiracy theories, insists that the Institute disposes of the kids once they're finished with them. Soon after, Tony shows up to tell Luke to get ready for his first experiment. At the same time, Tim chats with the hotel owner, who mentions that Wendy tried calling him several times that morning, but he didn't want to wake Tim. Grateful, Tim thanks him and rushes to the station, where he learns that 2 dangerous criminals are heading toward the town, and Wendy wanted to warn him. Back at the Institute, Julia hears about Michelle's death and grows furious, especially because she's now short on staff. She's particularly angry with Trevor for hiring Kate behind her back and using her to spy on Michelle for 3 months. Trevor insists everything he did was for the Institute's good, but the tension between them is undeniable. It's obvious they despise one another, and Trevor believes he deserves Julia's position since it was his mentor who originally helped her rise to power. They then contact the mysterious leader of the organization to update him on Michelle's situation. He scolds them for their incompetence in choosing personnel, orders Julia to clean up the mess, and abruptly ends the call. Julia orders Trevor to appoint Kate as the new head of the abduction team so she can bring in fresh children for the Institute. Meanwhile, Luke is taken by Tony for his first experiment. He's strapped into the same chair, wires attached to his head to monitor his brain signals. Dr. Daniel explains that after being injected with a serum, Luke will begin to see tiny dots of light, and all he has to do is report when he sees them. Daniel also instructs him to use his powers to lift a toolbox from the table. Luke tries but fails on his first attempt, so Tony injects him with a stronger dose. This time, Luke successfully raises the box into the air without touching it. Afterward, Luke joins Nikki for a basketball game, and together they start plotting an escape. Their first problem is the surveillance cameras. They have no idea how to disable them without a jamming device. Luke suggests they lure one of the staff members to help them, stressing that it must remain a secret between them and that they need to move quickly since no one stays in the front section for more than 2 weeks. He also points out they'll need help from a TP child who can control human minds. That night, Tim talks with Wendy and asks about Annie, since he had seen her earlier arguing with a woman named Sloane in town. Wendy explains that Sloane's daughter drowned back in 2008 at a place called the Red Steps, but unlike everyone else, Annie insists the girl and her friends didn't drown. She believes the Institute was behind their deaths. Annie also claims she has supernatural abilities, can read thoughts, and even glimpse the future. At that point, we also learn Tim's mother had died of dementia, which makes him sympathize with Annie because she reminds him of his mom. The next day, Luke notices the setup of a new room prepared for another child soon to arrive at the Institute. Excited, he rushes to tell his friends that the new recruit looks to be very young, and he's eager to see what kind of powers the child might have. Around the same time, he learns that George has successfully passed most of his experiments, including the latest one called the Dream Box. George's powers have advanced so much that he can now control coins inside the vending machine without even looking at them. Tim stops by the supermarket and meets Dobira, the owner, who tells him he's a migrant from Mogadishu who came here to escape the war in his homeland. That night, while on duty as usual, Tim goes to check on Annie, who's living in a small tent on the street. As he's speaking with her, he suddenly hears gunfire and rushes toward the market. There, he finds the same criminals Wendy had warned him about. Before he can act, they fire shots in his direction and flee the scene. Tim isn't hit, but he hurries inside to find Dobira bleeding out. He quickly presses a bandage against the wound to hold back the bleeding until the ambulance arrives. When his colleague Drew shows up, Tim tells him to call emergency services immediately and orders all checkpoints to intercept the thieves' car. Meanwhile, at the Institute, Julia sits in her office recording a birthday message for her father. Looking out the window afterward, she's surprised to see Daniel and Trevor speaking together. Trevor pressures Daniel to choose one of the children to enhance into a clairvoyant so they can later sell the child to a wealthy investor. Back in town, when the ambulance finally arrives, Tim's superior praises him, calling him a hero for saving Dobira's life, and insists on getting the report quickly so he can submit it to the unit. He tells Tim that Dobira wouldn't have survived if it weren't for his quick action to stop the bleeding. At the Institute, Luke finally sees the new child, Avery, who is frightened and desperately wants to go back to his mother. Suddenly, Kalisha senses a strange energy coming from him, as if he's trying to control her mind. She immediately tells Nikki and Luke about the feeling. The two are thrilled. This could be their chance to escape the Institute. The next day, Luke is brought by Tony for another experiment. Once again, he's strapped into the chair, and Dr. Daniel injects him with the serum. Luke's chest tightens, his breathing becomes strained, and he struggles to swallow. Daniel instructs him to say something if he sees the colored dots, but Luke is terrified and can barely get the words out. Tony brings over a small screen and places it in front of Luke's eyes, ordering him to focus on it until he sees the dots. Whenever Luke tries to look away, Tony forces him back to the screen. Eventually, Luke begins to see clusters of colored dots, but we learn these dots exist only in his mind. No one else can see them. Luke lies and tells them he doesn't see anything. Dr. Daniel then shows him a paper with a drawing and asks him to describe it. Since Luke can't actually see it, he blurts out whatever comes to mind. Tony loses his temper, shocks him with electricity, and warns him not to lie again. Afterward, they send Luke back to his room to rest. Exhausted and traumatized, he breaks down, bleeding from his nose but too numb to care. Meanwhile, Tim goes to the police station, where Wendy asks about his report. She tells him Drew left his name out of it, even though he was the one who saved the shop owner. Tim explains he doesn't want recognition or to be seen as a hero. He just wants to stay out of the noise and chaos because he still hasn't recovered from the incident with the boy who died because of him. Back at the Institute, Avery begins reading the minds of the other children. He casually blurts out that Luke has a crush on Kalisha, while Kalisha likes Nikki, who isn't interested. The revelation embarrasses all three of them, and they sit in awkward silence, impressed nonetheless by Avery's extraordinary abilities. Later, Maureen goes to Julia's office, and Julia sternly warns her to keep her distance from Avery, since he might read her mind and uncover the truth about the crimes being committed inside the Institute. Meanwhile, Avery is sitting with the other kids when suddenly he drifts away mentally and finds himself connected to Annie, though he doesn't know who she is or why he's seeing her. The only link between them is their shared mental abilities. Just then, all the children hear a terrifying humming sound, so intense they can't endure it or figure out where it's coming from. Watching on the surveillance monitors, Julia notices Daniel and Trevor whispering together. Suspicious, she activates the audio feed and learns they're plotting to sell Luke once his powers are fully developed. Furious, Julia decides to call the organization's mysterious leader and report everything, hoping to get Trevor expelled from the Institute. But the leader warns her that Trevor suspects her as well and says he won't take anyone's word until one of them can provide concrete proof of the other's betrayal. While Julia is on the phone with the leader, she compulsively slices her hand with a sharp object, indulging in the pain because she takes pleasure in hurting herself. That night, Tim makes his usual patrol through town and stops to check on Annie. She tells him she heard the same humming noise she always senses from the Institute, only this time it was far stronger. She doesn't know the cause, but warns him that she's had a vision of a plane crash, an important man named Ramsey's aircraft falling from the sky, and she's certain the Institute is behind it. Tim brushes off her warning, tells her to rest, have a drink to calm her nerves, and even suggests she see a psychiatrist. Annie refuses, insisting she doesn't want to take sedatives or drugs that cloud her mind, and explains she gave up alcohol years ago to keep her thoughts clear. Meanwhile, Avery goes with Luke to buy cookies from the vending machine. He uses his telepathic power to control Luke's mind, making him purchase licorice cookies even though Luke hates licorice. Luke is both amazed by Avery's brilliance and tormented by the reminder that he needs to escape the Institute before it breaks him completely. Later, Tim visits a bar where he meets Kate, who introduces herself as a journalist. Curious, he asks if she knows anything about the Institute. Kate replies that there are countless theories. Some say they experiment on aliens. Others claim they're building weapons or bombs, but no one has ever proven anything. Tim tells her about Annie and how she suspects the Institute is abducting children. Just then, breaking news flashes on the TV about a plane crash, the very incident Annie had predicted. Shocked, Tim tells Kate that Annie foresaw the accident before it happened. The next day, Luke shares his observations with Nikki. He's been watching the guards and noticed their patrols run in 2 shifts with a 6-hour gap. If they want to escape, their best chance will be between 1 and 1:30 a.m. At the same time, Avery uses his power to control the mind of a guard dog and sees into the Institute's back garden. He discovers an old, rusted wall that looks like a potential escape route. Luke is thrilled, calling Avery a genius, and declares this will be their plan to finally break free from the Institute. Kalisha arrives and tells the others she's just gone through the dream box. She's shaken to the core as she describes how it forced her to relive her worst nightmares. The group rallies around her, trying to comfort and support her. Julia later stages a celebration, calling it a graduation, because Kalisha is now being transferred to the back section of the Institute. The kids, desperate to know what awaits her, join hands to form a mental link so Avery can peer into Kalisha's mind as she's taken away. Through her eyes, Avery sees her entering a long, dark tunnel leading into the back section. But the moment she steps inside, his connection cuts off. A wave of interference blocks his telepathy, proof that whatever lies behind those walls is shielded from their powers. That night, Tim makes his usual rounds through the city, only to find Annie dead in her tent. An empty liquor bottle lies beside her, and he assumes she drank herself to death, a tragic end to her paranoia and visions. The next day, 3 new arrivals are brought to the Institute.